You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, obviously reeling in the aftermath of yesterday's election results here. The question that I've been getting, I think, from a legal perspective, more than any other question in light of Trump's victory is what happens to the ongoing cases that he's contending with. So I know that we're dealing with two buckets here. We have federal cases and state cases. So first off, federal cases, I feel like this one's going to be an easy one. What's happening here?
Yeah, Brian, it feels like darkness has descended not only on American democracy, but on the prospect of any accountability for the crimes Donald Trump and his criminal associates committed against the American people. So first of all, with respect to the federal cases, I almost feel guilty when I say, well, of course, his federal cases will be dismissed. Donald Trump will appoint a nefarious attorney general and order him to just go ahead and corruptly dismiss the criminal cases against him, because that shouldn't just be something that we casually or cavalierly say. It shouldn't go in one ear and out the other, because it is just this sort of deep, abject corruption by the highest government official in our land. And frankly, if we normalize it, if we talk about it like it's just another day at the office, well, that just continues the march toward autocracy, toward dictatorship, toward banana republic. So, but the reality is he will have the power, he will have the authority to direct his attorney general to just dismiss his criminal cases without cause. Of course, there's only one criminal case that is technically moving in the direction of trial right now. That is his election interference case. He's indicted in Washington, D.C. on 4 felony counts, and Judge Chutkan is in the process of litigating which of those 4 criminal counts survive the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling. And if the process were allowed to play out, I predict that all 4 would survive the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling. That case will almost inevitably be dismissed. And of course, the case that's down in Florida, where Donald Trump, who it looks like may very well come into possession of the nuclear codes again, Donald Trump is charged with, it's up on appeal, but he's charged with stealing some of our nation's most closely guarded secrets and just casually keeping them in ballrooms and bathrooms down at Mar-a-Lago, accessible to goodness knows who. And he's also charged with obstructing justice by refusing to return them and violating our nation's espionage laws because the nature of the information he stole and unlawfully retained. Very easy case to prove on the merits, but as we all know, Judge Aileen Cannon, appointed by Donald Trump and frankly confirmed after he lost the last election, she's dismissed the case. It's up on appeal, and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, if they're permitted to continue with the appeal, will almost certainly reverse the case and send it back to the trial court. And if they do that, Donald Trump again will undoubtedly direct his corrupt attorney general to just dismiss the case against him. So I think if Donald Trump is sworn in on January 20th, there is very little hope that he will ever be held accountable for the crimes for which he's indicted or the crimes that are up on appeal right now down in Florida.
All right, well, that brings us to the state prosecutions. He's contending with the RICO prosecution in Georgia, and he's contending with the New York prosecution. So first off, what happens to the pending sentencing that's going to happen in New York? Does that go forward?
Great question. So I think all along my belief has been that because Judge Merchan, who presided over and is presiding over the New York State Court prosecution, where Donald Trump is already convicted by a jury of his peers of 34 felony crimes designed to cheat in and try to steal the 2016 presidential election. We feel a recurring theme here, don't we? So Judge Merchan has to first make a ruling on whether the New York convictions survive the Supreme Court presidential immunity ruling. I predict he will rule they do survive. The problem is, the minute he makes that ruling, and he has to make that ruling before he proceeds to sentencing Donald Trump, the minute he makes that ruling, the legal procedure that applies dictates that Donald Trump and his lawyers get to immediately appeal it, and that will mean putting a stop to the upcoming sentencing hearing. So that is likely what will happen. And then, let's assume, Brian, that the case continues in existence after January 20th. It is still an ongoing case in the New York State court system. It's in, bouncing between various levels of the appeals court in both the state system and perhaps in the federal system. Here's what will happen. The prevailing wisdom, though this has never been tested in the courts, is if a state is prosecuting a sitting president, that state case is paused. There's a stay entered, and that case remains paused until the president leaves presidential power, and then that case can again move forward. So what does that tell us? Well, while Donald Trump is president, there is almost no chance that the New York prosecution will progress. It'll be stopped dead in its tracks, probably while it's bouncing up and down between those appellate courts.
What about the Georgia RICO prosecution? Because aside from Donald Trump, there are still over a dozen co-defendants who aren't protected by this DOJ guidance that says that a sitting president can't be indicted. Those people aren't protected by any DOJ guidance. So what happens to them and what happens to Trump?
Yeah, great question. And it looks like this is where defendants will be treated differently. Donald Trump, in the event he is sworn in on January 20th, that state case will probably pause against him, just like it will pause up in New York. However, it will and should progress against all of the remaining co-defendants. I think they started out with, I believe, 19 co-defendants or 18 co-defendants.
Yeah.
4 pleaded guilty, including some of Donald Trump's lawyers, and flipped and agreed to testify truthfully against Donald Trump and the other co-conspirators. But the case can absolutely progress to trial against the remaining defendants other than Donald Trump. So, that could produce some guilty pleas. It could produce some convictions. But remember, Brian, the posture of that case is it is in the Georgia appeals court right now. Why? Because the defendants appealed Judge McAfee, he's the presiding judge in Georgia, Judge McAfee's ruling that District Attorney Fani Willis, who was just reelected by the good people of Georgia, was not disqualified from the case. She could continue on as the lead prosecutor, as the district attorney. So right now, that decision is under appeal. So that case can progress against all defendants other than Donald Trump, but it remains on a very slow track.
And with regard to any possible convictions and sentences for these co-defendants, with whom Donald Trump obviously shares some affinity and some relationship, is there any way that because this is a state case, he would be able to pardon them, or is he completely incapable of offering any pardons because they would be prosecuted in the state court system?
Yeah, Brian, the pardon power, the presidential pardon power does not apply to state court cases.
I guess I should ask this then. Is there anything that he could do, aside from the pardon itself? Is there any power that he could wield, any lever he could turn to help these people?
Yes, and in case anybody thought they might get some rest tonight, they might be able to sleep soundly, that's where I was going to go next. Because even though the presidential pardon power does not apply to state court prosecutions or convictions, we all have heard Donald Trump several times saying he's willing to use the military to go after the enemy from within. And even when Fox News hosts would try to push him off of the enemy from within, he would say, no, I'm talking about my political opponents and enemies. I have to believe Fani Willis has probably earned herself a marquee spot as a Donald Trump political nemesis, enemy, opponent. So will he unlawfully use the military, abusing his presidential power, use the military and somehow intervene in the Georgia state prosecutions that can proceed against his co-defendants? It's anybody's guess. This is Donald Trump, and this is unfortunately who a majority of the American people just voted to return to presidential power, even though he's an avowed day one dictator. He said he'll terminate portions of the Constitution, and he said he'll use the military against American citizens. This is where we are.
Glenn, what's your message to folks that are watching? I know there's an overwhelming sense of despair and exhaustion among our community here. So what do you say to those people who are watching who don't really know which way to turn right now?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So first of all, I just watched Kamala Harris's concession speech, and toward the end, she said something that I think is important. It is that this is not the time to throw up your hands. This is the time to roll up your sleeves, and that's what we have to do, even though the future seems very uncertain. And then the other thing I do is, one of my heroes, to the extent I have heroes, is President Abraham Lincoln. And one of my favorite Lincoln quotes is, be sure to plant your feet in a good place, then stand firm. And that's what we need to do. Yes, it seems dark. I do hope it's always darkest before the dawn.
Well, look, the important thing here, and I think you alluded to this as well, is that it's important not to disengage, because I think that that's exactly what the other side is looking for. They want you to feel so powerless, so helpless that you'll just throw up your hands and walk away and just wash your hands of everything in politics. That would, in essence, reward the very people who are seeking to take everything away from you. So don't give them exactly what they want. Take the time you need. Take days, weeks, take the holidays, but eventually come back and be ready to fight, because this is going to be a fight. And in the same way that Trump was elected in 2016 and took office in 2017, and within 2 years, Democrats had already secured the biggest House margin in American history against him, we'll do that again here. But it's going to take a little bit of time. So take the time you need, take care of yourselves in the meantime, and when you're ready to come back, we'll be here ready to fight with you. So with that said, of course, the best way to stay on top of what we're doing is to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.